a two-click studio. Suddenly you can go live. All this is available to everyone. So Giselle, thank you very much for being part of the symposium. And of course, you're going to tell us all about yourself, which is going to be very interesting. So I don't know how much you've heard about the symposium. Basically, indigenous peoples and mediation, I felt, was an area which we need to discuss. There is so much we have to learn. So that's what it's all about. And if you want to just tell us about yourself, and as much as you want to tell us about yourself, please, Giselle.
Yes, thank you so much, Vikram, for this space and opportunity. My name is Giselle Huamani. I am Peruvian, originally from Peru, but I have had the opportunity to work and be trained in different places and different schools. One of the schools that I was trained for my doctoral studies was the Institute for Conflict Analysis and Resolution around 1994, which is a little while ago. But since it was a space in which many other colleagues from around the world were going and studying and reflecting about their practice, about their mediation challenges, it was a great opportunity to reflect on how peacemaking was being developed, how it was being reaching other communities and other populations. So since 1994, I was able to work with many colleagues from different continents and different countries, which gave me a very interesting insight into culture and how pretty much in every country in the world, there are populations, indigenous populations that are not being recognized, that have tremendous challenges into having access to decision makings and in the management of natural resources and their national policies. So you can say that many of these conflicts around the world, they are very particular. They are very specific to the country's realities. If you talk about Northern Ireland, or if you talk about Kenya with the crisis in 2008, or if you talk about Guatemala with populations that have lived excluded from the political processes for a long period, you see that there are populations that struggle, that often don't find the means of making social changes in a ways that bring into peaceful changes and peaceful processes. So our countries, of course, now we are in a new stage. We are in a new decade, in a new century, in which we have now new challenges that are more related or more urgent, related to the natural resources that we know they're being depleted, that are affecting the societies and also affecting the environment. So I could say that in my 25, 30 years of work in the field of conflict transformation, some of the problems continue in terms of indigenous populations trying to have more access to decision making in parity, in the equal standing But now we have more pressure in terms of all these changes that are happening in the environment and in the social arena. My work has taken me to do or to intervene or to participate in several processes. I have learned a lot in terms of the local and indigenous approaches to peace and conflict resolution. I often found, and that was one of the first lessons that I had at the Institute for Conflict Analysis and Resolution at George Mason, that we were talking so much about alternative dispute resolution when there was also original dispute resolution processes, approaches, and ways of building peace. So in all this work during the years, I've been able to see and recognize and to identify how the local approaches to peace and mediation often are in less visible and less empowering place. And we need to think as societies on how to create other spaces and opportunities for those different ways of valuing and developing peace so that they are more in equal terms.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not going to say anything. I just like that original dispute resolution. I like that terminology. I think I'm going to use that. That original dispute resolution is what we have to move towards. But Giselle, if you don't mind, give me 1 second. Can I just put up the list of speakers which we have? Can I just put this up for a minute so that
Yes.
people? This is what we have. These are the number of speakers in this symposium. So we've got perspectives from around. I mean, of course, this is not large enough. I mean, next year I hope to have many, many more, but this is a start on the discussion. So I just wanted to put up. So I'm sorry, I mean, I said something, I cut you off, please. It's your show, your show. I'm just sitting here. I put myself on mute if you want. It just, that sound just came out because original dispute resolution just struck with me. So
yes. One of the things that I want to reflect with you on this session, I will share a screen. Hope it's working. Wait. It's on how we bring into these situations, how we reconcile and how we integrate and how we take the best of bringing the different approaches to peace and conflict transformation and mediation. Let's see, share screen.
And Giselle, you're going to give us a perspective from South America, Africa, North America, Australia, Asia, everywhere?
I will say from Latin America, specifically from Peru. But we have to, I think that there are some reflections on how in other places also is being work of these challenges. Can you confirm with me that you can see the page?
Yeah, I can see the slides, but if you want to start the slideshow, maybe it'll be a little bigger, but it's quite okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, where is it? Okay. So let's see if it works, if the pages move. Can you confirm?
It's just, I mean, right
Are
now
they moving?
yeah, now we've got the slideshow. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you for the time of people, the viewers who are taking their time and the opportunity to reflect on some ideas and some lessons also that have accumulated through the years and through the work. Um, and I want to shed some ideas about the realities and the challenges in resolving conflicts. Specifically, I'm looking at the Peruvian Amazon because it's a home of an important numbers of ethnic and original and indigenous communities, which constitute around the 40% of the population that inhabit this country called Peru. One of the things that I want to shed a light is that the peacemaking and mediation that are being taken on by the local communities, indigenous communities about peace, has a very particular values and a very particular flavor, which often is distant from what in Western societies manage as peacemaking. And for started, the word peace and the word conflict in many local languages are not easily translated. And in that translation, there is a very important and significant meaning, which I have to put some light on. For example, in these two drawings, in one workshop that indigenous people from the Amazon had a few years ago, the word or the concept of peace, the value of peace, was represented by all these different houses and different homes, which themselves, they also constitute the community. If you can see, you have like a little family sheds, family units, but you also have the bigger housing, which hosts all the community with their regular meetings about different activities in their society. So the peace means everyone. It means the collectivity. It means the activities, the social activities in which they identify very important values. One of them, and I'm translating, it's links of friendships, links and relationships of friendships. Another concept that it was very important that it was also identified is to get common agreement. That means to talk, to build consensus on something that is shared among the different people. Another third concept is mutual respect through a series of rituals, procedures, a set of customs, which strengthen this relationship among them. Also, another important element, a key element of this concept of peace is the communication, continuous communication among different members of society. In the same way, to have a common vision, shared vision of what the community is, and what the well-being is and where do they want to go, which also rests in this element of equality. And then it's very important to keep the balance, to keep the harmony, in which all the different individuals have their opportunity, the chance of getting their human needs satisfied. This is a very important element, which, of course, you do not find them like, walking on the street, walking in the field, but you find it in the way how the communities, they live, they react, they have their daily activities. However, when we find conflicts between a community and an actor who doesn't belong to the community, then that's when you see these clashes, you see this disconnection, and you see these conflicts, which has this dimension, very important dimension, that has to do with the worldview. So those elements that are identified by the local people themselves of the Awahun community, those elements, they become very important, and you can see how they get into a clash when some of the members of these communities get into conflicts with people who are not Awahun, who are not from the context, who are not from the area. So that brings us to reflect and to wonder how then the mechanisms, so the procedures and the ways and approaches in which local people, the indigenous communities, make peace, they respond to their original methods of conflict resolution or their original dispute resolution approaches. How are they reconciled, or how can they solve conflicts when the other actors, maybe people from other indigenous communities, or maybe people from companies, or maybe people from the state, or other origins, they can solve the conflicts that emerge between them or among them. And that's a question that is not only important and applicable to the Peruvian context, but also to infinity or several other multicultural contexts in which you find communities from other cosmovision or other cultural background, who are getting into conflict with the local communities. So, for example, in Suriname, which is the northern part of Latin America, South America, you find local communities, indigenous communities, who are somehow interacting with other communities coming from Africa, from India, from Thailandia, and Thailand, or other communities, non-indigenous, and then they are struggling for the natural resources and their having access to the political system. And then you find conflict. Or if you find in Fiji, where you have the local communities who are also receiving influx of other ethnic communities from India or from Indonesia, also coming into their lands, and also starting their own business and their own way of dealing with the natural resources. And then they start becoming tension and clashes between these different, or among these different communities that have different understandings on the land, the natural resources, and also decision-making processes. So this question about how do we create or foster spaces in which the indigenous communities, the local people, and also other communities who are, for different reasons, becoming, getting into these areas or these lands or these territories, they start new tensions and new conflicts and new disputes emerging in these areas. So the peacemaking and mediation approaches on some of these local communities, which work very well for the local communities, then start getting into these tensions with serious challenges into resolving conflict with new neighbors and new third parties who appear or come into the areas. So we, in this world in which we are having more and more presence of other communities and other actors within the local communities, then we need to reflect and think about new approaches that can empower the local communities, but also transform and create trust with these new neighbors. A UN report several years ago was explaining and was making evident, it was a research done around the world, in which more and more we could see more the pressure on the territories of indigenous people for their local resources. And that means land, forestry, and also mining, gas, oil, and other minerals that can be found in the area. So this UN report was finding that more and more pressure is being put precisely in the territories of indigenous people. So how these approaches to peace, in which contain very important elements for the well-being and for the way of functioning and to survival of these communities, how their approaches and how the states can help the survival and the development of these communities in equal basis with other actors. So we may think about then dispute resolution processes in this way, in which I have been reflecting during the last 20, 30 years. When we find a conflict between non-indigenous people, that means people from the cities and from non-ethnic groups, usually their way of resolving conflict is by judicial system, which is applicable in every part, in every country in the world. But they also use alternative dispute resolution processes, which have been promoted heavily around the end of 1990s to, until today. And these alternative dispute resolution processes, they range from different processes, from arbitration, adjudication, conciliation, and mediation is one of the processes which has a very important values, which actually it's many of the mediation models have been inspired by the mediation processes of the original the indigenous people in Africa, in many countries, in many research that was done more than 50 years ago. So the non-indigenous people usually will use this set of different avenues or mechanisms to resolve the conflict. And as I was telling you before, if we are talking about indigenous people in their territories among indigenous people, then they will resolve the conflict also with their own mechanisms, no? When it's in their territories. So they will have original dispute resolution processes that which I was mentioning before, and that will be part of the way of resolving conflicts. But the question and the big challenges will be on how we resolve conflicts between indigenous people and non-indigenous people. That means Western companies or other actors who are not indigenous. What are the ways and the means of resolving conflicts? And we will see that if it's within the territory of indigenous people, many countries have developed different mechanisms to deal with these conflicts, whether their conflict occurs within indigenous territories or outside indigenous territories. That means in this mixture of settings. And it's very interesting because, for example, in Guatemala, there was a period in which the UN was working very interestingly in how to implement cultural translators that will be appointed to the indigenous people who were having a conflict with non-indigenous people outside the territory. And these cultural translators would be explaining, would put in context, would be helping the indigenous people to explain their worldview and their way of dealing with conflict, so that their or the resolution of those conflicts, whether it was by alternative dispute resolution or by the judicial processes, could take into account how the indigenous people was reacting, was acting, was making certain decisions. In Canada, it was a very interesting, in the Atlantic coast, there was an interesting experiences in which judges, special judges, were appointed, and also they were with this insight and with this specific training, could look at the conflicts and could help the parties to resolve the issues, also serving as translators. Also, in this other quadrant of conflicts between non-Indigenous people and Indigenous people, you know, these mixed settings outside the territory, also a cultural translator and an anthropologist were key to try to explain and help building bridges. So as you can see, there's the need of creating in each society these bridges of people who are mediators, people who are translators, people who are appointed judges or appointed mediators who can help parties understand each other in terms of where they are coming from, what is the worldview, how are they trying to fulfill their needs from their own cultural perspective, and so how these bridges, these actors, so these translators, so these mediators can help build bridges, but taking into account the worldviews from these two different actors and groups. So when we talk about conflicts in which Indigenous peoples are involved, it's different from working with other issues or other subjects that may be of conflict in the urban area, for example. You know, the population from the urban areas may be more westernized, maybe more socialized into certain patterns of handling conflict, handling issues, on how to manage or how to swim through the formal state mechanisms of conflict resolution and mediation. So when we are talking about conflicts that relate or involve Indigenous people, then we need to make an extra effort into how to value and how to recognize their worldview and how the issues play an important role on the way of communicating and behaving in conflicts. You know, it will not only be about maybe transactional kind of exchange, because it will be more about how they build the world, how important it is for them, for their substance, survival, for their identity and their belongingness. So in Peru, I want to give you one example of it. In Peru, we have different ways in how we have learned to deal with different conflicts that have to do with resources, political decisions, exclusions, etc. And often those are issues that have a structural aspect. They are heavily related on how the country has been designed, the rules have been designed, and how the history of the country has excluded the population, especially the Indigenous population, and what are the resources or the mechanisms for allowing the or bringing in into this decision making, the public decision making to these indigenous groups, so that they can satisfy their human needs. And what we see is that, of course, for those who do not know much about the Peruvian history, we have in 1821 we have independence, but we have a very long history of struggle when the Spaniards came in the 1492 and 1521, you came to Peru, and a whole struggle among the indigenous people for surviving the colonial empire. So we can say that there have been many changes into the political and economic and legal system along many years, just to make a short story, which bring us to a Peru, which is a modern country, but still struggling to give the opportunities, equal opportunities to all the different communities, especially indigenous communities. So it is a process, a macro process that has been full of conflicts, social conflicts, and which we do not finish to find the ways of resolving all the issues, all the pending structural problems that we still have as a society. But in that context, we have had a process, a very interesting process in the last 20 years, in which we as a country, we have been using several mechanisms of resolving conflicts, which has led us to every time more formalized mechanisms and more structured ways of handling conflicts and promoting dialogue. Of course, we have a long way to go, but we have also walked a long way. And we have found that environmental conflicts, they pose right now some of the more complex, among other conflicts, other type of conflicts that we also find, which are the most complex, long-lasting, and also difficult to resolve and to face. We have developed as a country a set of different mechanisms, such as dialogue tables, tables for development, to try to deal with some of these structural problems, but also technical spaces, so technical tables, in which you are able to look into the more technical aspect of those problems. So as Peruvians, we have developed quite a set of tools and approaches to resolve conflicts. And as I was saying to you, we still have a long way to go, but a lot of efforts, a lot of reflection have been invested into finding new ways and new approaches into how to resolve the amount of problems and conflicts that we face as Peruvians. And I want to focus in one area, Loreto, which is one of the regions in which we can find most of the indigenous communities. Actually, there are 3 or 4, in reality, there are like 6 regions, Amazonian regions, which are the home of important indigenous communities, indigenous ethnic groups, nations that are trying to affirm themselves and to resolve also conflicts. And I just want to show you some of the what is going on. And in this registration or register of conflicts by institution at the national government, we can find, you can see in red and in green, 2 sets of readings of conflicts. One looks at, in red, 140, and all type of conflicts related to these regions. And in green is the Ombudsman office that in some point was registering 209 conflicts. The numbers are just a reference, but what is important to identify in these 2 columns, the columns in red and the columns in green, is that mining and petroleum and energy cases are the main focus of this registration, of this database. And of course, the focus is put on this kind of conflict because they are related directly to a very important project, which bring a lot of income to the country. So the database in red is a database handled by the official national government, and the green 2 columns, one is percentage and one is the real numbers, is handled by the Ombudsman office, which has an excellent job registering also conflicts and comparing and being kind of the watch eye on how the public offices perform. But in these cases, which are the national cases, they contrast very much with what there is registered in orange, in that square, in that box at the bottom, which is only in Loreto, which is this region that I was pointing out before. And in that very large region, look at how Gorel and CAN, which are the regional government offices, they register conflicts in the region. And in the lower number, 28, that says Alto Nanay, is just the number of conflicts in just one watershed in this large amount. Why do I show these different numbers? I show these different numbers to prove that depending on the level, their zoom glass, the eye, is like zooming in larger or zooming micro. And when the national government and the ombudsman office, they look at conflicts, they have a more macro level, macro eye of identifying conflicts. But as we move into the regional part of the country, we find more number of conflicts. And when we go into the communities, we even see more number of conflicts. Who has the reason? Who is right? Who is wrong? Well, everyone is right. And they are right in the sense that they look at the type of conflicts depending on their own mandate and their own competencies and their own level of concern. And the challenge or the problems that we find with this thing is that the communities then start having other views and other experience of conflicts which differ from what is being seen by the national government, and not necessarily and by the regional government, and not necessarily their own conflicts are taking the importance, or they are taken care by the institutions that need to be involved. And what happens is that when we start looking at the local type of conflicts, and when we start looking at other regions with the same type of local conflicts, we start identifying conflicts that they need public policies, conflicts that they repeat themselves in large areas in other regions, and that they are telling us that they may be small, they may be involving groups, communities, maybe not big companies, big investment, but because of the smaller magnitude, they repeat themselves in other areas, but they are big in terms of numbers, or they are even bigger in terms of a population being involved. So the larger, or we'll say, the conflicts that are related to a strategic project are important, may overshadow and somehow all these other problems and other conflicts that may occur and they may repeat themselves along, the Amazon or the territories or other regions. So when we see the type of conflicts that are at the regional level, we find that there is serious problems related to coca harvesting along several areas, and with a pandemic which affected the whole world, we found, and actually many of the NGOs, international and local NGOs that are supervising, the environment and some of these problems that they are evaluating and doing a follow-up, they found that many of these problems have actually gotten worse during the pandemic, because many of the public officers, public representative, or public police or military who were patrolling certain areas which are very difficult access, because of the COVID, they had to retreat. And many of these problems, like coca harvesting, illegal cutting, deforestation, had gone worse. For example, in the area of the Amazon, which before there were around 9 um, areas of airstrips, illegal airstrips for small aircrafts, which were bringing illegal coca production out of it. In the last years, those illegal airstrip have multiplied to 50, even 60 airstrip that have been identified, and they are areas, points in which many of these things, drug trafficking has been going on. So in the regional government, identified the coca harvesting, the illegal cutting of trees, and also deforestation for these commercial plantings, has been extended, has advanced at a great speed, creating serious problems for the future of the Amazon, which is also related to extraction of natural resources. This is affecting directly to the indigenous populations, all of it. And in Peru, as in many countries in Latin America, we have had the persecution and death of many of environmental defenders, which is of a great concern of many sectors in society and of international community too. The other aspect of the problem that is creating a lot of small conflict has to do with land titling. A lot of the land of the indigenous communities are not secure. They do not have the titles, and it has been a very long and tedious and inefficient, often, process of titling, which have not ended up in giving better, more protection to the indigenous communities. So that's another big problem. Water usage and also water sewage disposal, all of them have been a great problem for contamination of the land, but also of the water. And the water, even in the Amazon, that is it's very abundant because of the rain, abundant rain, but it is a problem of having water that it is clean and it is the basis for good wild fishery, and also the fauna that lives from these waters, and also in many of the cases, the oil production in the Amazon. We have had so many spills over that has impacted the health and the survival of many local and indigenous communities. In some areas on the Amazon, in the south part, not in the Loreto, but in the south part, the mining production and the oil production and the contamination of the waters and the rivers, and the fauna that is also contaminated for either oil or mining, river mining for gold, is creating such a huge problem, a hazard for the survival of many of these communities. So when we think about what can be done in terms of mediation and other conflict transformation approaches, we see that they have these processes, they have serious limitations. And some of the interesting processes for dialogue and mediation has been somehow successful in deforestation, creating some spaces, some dialogues for community dialogues into how to empower and how to create new approaches on natural resources, better use, sustainable use of the natural resources. So in deforestation, in natural resource management, land titling, the mediation have had some interesting case success. In water usage, water sewage disposal, water contamination has been complex, has been difficult, long processes of dialogue and mediation, but there have been some movement, some progress on that. However, in the areas of coca harvesting and illegal cutting, or areas that had to do with gold exploration in rivers, which are illegal, that there we can say that there has been no use of mediation, and actually the government and the public institutions that has to confirm the legal framework of protecting the regions. This has been the only way of trying to guarantee these areas. We have had several problems with that, and trying to impose a law and trying to get these third parties, illegal third parties, to respect the law. So because we are talking about areas which are very, very difficult to get in, how to have a presence of the state and how to work hand in hand with the local communities, it's a challenge, because in many indigenous communities have been the defenders of the territories, the defenders of the natural resources, and they by themselves have been victims and target of these illegal activities and violence. So the state need to empower their own public officers at the local level, but work strategically with the local communities. But also we have these problems with the oil production that still we are talking about infrastructures that are very old, ways of handling oil that haven't been participatory enough of people who have communities who felt that they have not been taken into account. And so the government have been trying for several periods, trying to improve and to create new process of consultation, free and prior consultations. So those are processes which are often, surrounded by lack of communication or serious challenges on participation. And well, these are not processes that are easy, but that they have a lot of challenges, and that all the parties need to put a lot of effort into creating meaningful and sustainable process of conflict transformation. So these are some of the conflicts and the problems that are making this area very, very complex. In some of the areas, the original dispute resolution processes of the ethnic communities, of the original communities, are they have some footing, but not enough incorporation of those approaches and those local ways of dealing with conflicts. However, when we see some of the dialogue spaces or the dialogue processes, you can see how the local communities, the original communities, they demand and they put their conditions and their terms on how to handle conflicts. And these are processes that they're very demanding, very difficult, but that we need as a society find and to refine and to tune better ways of dialogue. When we see the conflicts identified by the environmental institution at the regional level, they identify, this is part of a process, an exercise done with them a few years ago. They find and they coincide with in some points with the problems identified at the regional level. And these environmental institutions, they find change of land use, oil production, flooding, small gold exploration, which is often illegal, as problems that are impacting, into the environment. And the environment is one of the type of the conflicts that I find it very difficult and complex to resolve. So in some of these problems, they coincide with what was identified in the exercise that I did before with the regional government. But you can see, you can observe how their eyes more fine into the certain type of problems, no? Like, for example, illegal fishing. Often the fishing doesn't respect the different type of the fish and the need of preserving the small ones, the small size, so that there is no overexploitation of fishing, or respecting certain conditions in terms of weather, in terms of areas of protection, in terms of the changes that happen in the seasons. Also, the coca harvesting, deforestation, which are the problems that I was mentioned to you. But the environmental institutions are keen, and they are more interested in developing mechanisms, finer mechanisms into resolving conflicts by specific approaches, like commissions, like early warning systems, or other, for example, what is called co-management areas, in which the local communities, their representatives are organized into how to manage natural resources within certain areas that can be named for conservancy, or areas that can be deemed as buffer zones for communities to use within certain approach and certain requirements, legal requirements. So when you see the efforts that the environmental institutions are doing, they are trying to have more presence and also working with communities, which has its own challenges. But also, I wanted to show you how at the community levels in this particular river basin, the problems are felt in with a different emphasis and priority. The land tenure, it's a problem for them because it can secure their way of living for future generations. And therefore the relationship with the forestry, which is their pharmacy, their market, provides them for everything and protection. The forestry and how it is being used within the local approaches is being recognized or not sufficiently by other third parties, living or neighbors, or even the government. So this forestry usage needs to be consensus, build consensus around. So through dialogue, through mediation, in which the communities, the local communities feel empowered and feel respected. But also, since there is more and more presence of third party who are non-Indigenous, then the land boundaries and the land tenures, they need to be very clear. And the state and the government needs to do more efforts into secure their territories. The government have tried to do several projects for land titling, as I was mentioning before, which contain a specific component of mediation. That means how they're in the process of settling the land boundaries, the communities and the neighbors, they do it in a way that is through dialogue. That means you don't want that the land boundary is set and create chaos or create hate and divisions, more of what they are now among the different communities. So the land boundaries and the land tenure and the land titling has to be done within an approach of peacemaking and conflict resolution and dialogue, so that this equilibrium, or this way of handling conflicts among the local actors and the local communities, indigenous and non-indigenous, which often are called colones or colonizers, or external mixed communities that come in and they start living in a territory given or taken by them. So how these processes are being developed in a way that doesn't create more violence, that actually acknowledge the rights of indigenous people, the way that empowers them for the way how they manage their territories, and also, in the end, how do you create societies or foster societies that are peaceful and that they resolve their issues in peaceful ways? So when you see these problems being identified by the local communities, they are related to issues that are linked directly to public policies at the more regional and national level, but they are also connected to the daily life of the people. And it is important in the way how they resolve those issues, those problems, those conflicts. They the government, the regional, the environmental institutions, and the local communities, they resolve them in a way that is peaceful, incorporating practices that are keen, that they are aligned to the values of peace of the local communities. So when you see these other issues on that the local communities identify, and this is just one example of how these 5 communities in the river basin identify issues, had to do with, for example, limited access to information, and communities need to have more capacity building in terms to be aware of how the government functions, what are the other constraints on the region, on the natural resources, to be able to see and compare their own experiences with the experiences of other communities and other regions. In one dialogue process, for example, that I did with our home communities a few years ago, we did a whole exercise of identifying and reflecting about the type of conflicts that they were having. And the interesting thing is that they were able to see how their dispute about the salt, this was a salt area, a natural salt that was found in the area, in the lands of this community, how the dispute and the deep division that was happening within this community, it was deeper and it was recurring. That means that over the last 50 years, they started conflicts over water, over forests, over the road, now over the salt, the salt mining. And they realized how the problem, the base of the problem, the resource, have changed over the years. But that the questions about what they wanted to do as a community remain. That means they weren't able to reconcile the different views about how to use, how to divide, how to manage the resources that the community had. And therefore, those who had a more individual idea of dividing the resources by families or by individuals versus those who believe that it was a community resources, therefore needs to be divided among all as a community, as a collectivity. Those two visions were in tension and were creating conflicts, and they weren't allowing the community to move ahead. So after I did this exercise with the communities, somebody in the exercise said to me, this same problem is happening with the Ashaninkas and these other communities, neighbor communities. They are just start dividing themselves since we had colonos and the market getting closer to us. We are seeing more and more of those conflicts and those problems. And the same problem that we're having, I've seen it with these other communities and these other neighbors. And that was a very interesting realization, because they could see how the conflict was not just about personalities and people, but were something that the community was experiencing, a transformation and changes that the community was not able to deal. Therefore, they needed to see also how their mechanisms, their original methods of conflict resolution, were not being effective, or what they needed to do differently this time. So the way how the local, the regional communities were experiencing these conflicts poses different challenges that give us some concern and reflection about how and where we moving as. So some of the common challenges that we found in these places is that when it's related to environmental conflicts, they are becoming more complex and the problems are interdependent and they keep changing. And also, we cannot say that the problem is just about a community in one specific area, but often, for example, in conflict related to oil, gold, mining, illegal deforestation, etc., that they go beyond specific boundaries, geographic and political boundaries. Also, we see that the effects on those problems in terms of the health of the animals, the health of the community, the health of the whole region, we start seeing the effects and the impacts in ways that we didn't consider, imagine. Now, some of a colleague who is a biologist was doing a research on the blood of certain birds in certain area where there is a lot of illegal river mining, and even the birds are being contaminated with all these mercury and all these elements that they are very harmful to health. And we see also that there is strong interest that they are playing around in these conflicts, which makes it harder. Sometimes are politically interests and sometimes very economic interests of different levels of people who are at the local level, leaders, third parties, sometimes from companies, sometimes from governments, who are not performing the role that they should be doing. So given this situation, you will find that having to figure out new ways of in dialoguing with actors, but also leveling the field so that all the different actors can have a stake and have a voice, and also new ways of governance for the community. It's a big challenge. So one of the ways how we are trying to create these new spaces has to do with allowing or spaces for the local people to identify their conflicts and to be empowered in how conflicts can be resolved, depending on the type of conflict, through different ways, through different means, including their own local original ways and approaches to handling conflicts. So how their voice are being heard, how they are being, these conflicts being taken into account, being processed as a communities, identified, by areas, by regions, by problems that are being tackled by the leaders, by the communities, and by local representatives, public officers. How do all these different ways of incorporating women's voice in how they see the conflicts, how they experience them, how they participate also in the solution, in the processes, all of that lead us uh, um, into giving new ways of registering, ways of analyzing the conflicts, ways of making visible issues and problems and conflicts that otherwise will be just too small for regional and national institutions that are in charge of handling conflicts. So we need to put more efforts into how the local communities can see their problems, see their conflicts, their issues. This is another drawing on how the problems about fishery and the forestry were being seen, and how the conflicts were being identified in red, where there were the nodes, were the areas that they were experiencing conflict with the natural resources, with the population, the animals, the communities, and how they need to look into different ways of these registering this information. So we have many pending questions about if the conservation areas are new ways of and opportunities for preventing conflict at the local level, because they can articulate, they can connect local populations into preserving, respecting, managing these very important areas, territories that are very important for the local communities, because finally these territories, they bring together the life of the nature with the life of the people within it, and they have a way of integrating the livelihood of the people with the nature, with the territories, in a way that can respect values, but that also makes sustainable the environment. Another question is if this early warning system at the community level can help empower the communities and also bring action from the local to the regional level in ways that are sustainable, in ways that they are more realistic with the needs of the local communities. Not that much as what comes into the mind, or it's urgent to the local officers or regional officers or national officers, but also the urgency that the local communities have. But also one important issue is how to create better access to communication to communities. And nowadays, I think that you know, even though we use national, regional community radio or signals, we really need to put more efforts in how to connect, give access to communities so that they get more knowledgeable, more empowered, they get connected with all the things that are going on so that they are able to handle it, to affirm themselves with this giving response to these new challenges. And also, since we're talking about communities that they are so far, so distant, how do we link the decision making from the local, the regional, and the national levels? You know, and there you need to put more effort on how to connect, perhaps with new technology, with more solar or satellite, solar power and satellite connections, so that people, they feel more valued, they are being incorporated in the decision making at the regional level, and also being able to raise their voice to solve many of their issues and basic human needs. So more than having responses, I think I have more questions and more issues and challenges that that come out from this area.
That was really
So
nice,
thank
Giselle.
you.
Thank you very much. It was really nice. But can you tell us a little bit about the population involved in Loreto, in terms of the percentage of population in Peru?
Yes, let's see. We are 32 millions in Peru, the whole Peru. 50 to 40% of the population, they identify themselves as of indigenous or indigenous roots. I myself, I have indigenous ancestry, in a whole background in indigenous people. However, we have the main indigenous populations, the Quechua and the Aymaras in the Andes, but the Amazon is the host of the rest of the indigenous populations. That means from 55 different communities, indigenous communities, 3 are in the Andean area, in the Andean zone, and the rest, the 51, 52, are in the Amazon. And from these 52 51 indigenous populations, you can see that there are a lot of communities who are well known. Their language is well recognized. They have some kind of organization, regional organization, even national organizations. Some of them, they are recognized, they are associated in regional organization. But there is also what is called the non-contact people. Mm-hmm. That means indigenous communities who are not part of the formal society. That means they are in areas which are now forbidden for non-indigenous to go in, or even for indigenous to go inside, because there are protected areas of people who haven't had any contact at all with with other indigenous communities or non-indigenous communities. That means their well-being, their the risk of getting sick even for getting in contact is very, very high. So in that sense, they are in a special category. We don't know how many people exactly because we don't have a census, and they have been just identified, through some means and mechanisms, but the distance is being kept so that their well-being and their rights are being protected. So in Loreto, we have a lot of population that are, we call it colonos, so that means they come from other parts of the country in Peru, that they are non-indigenous, or they are also mixed with indigenous, but there are also many original populations with their language, all their signal, external forms of expressing their culture.
But how does the legal structure work in relation to the ownership of the land and the resources?
Well, the problem that we have had is that the land tenure process of recognizing the land and the territories has not concluded. We had several attempts in the last 40 years of trying to recognize the land tenure, but they haven't been successful, especially in the Amazon areas. That means in the coast area where the main cities are, the land tenure has moved along very, very well. In the Andes, which is rough mountains that are as high as 4,000, 5,000 in some cases, but all of them above 3,000 meters above the sea. They have been regularized somehow, but there are still many communities that they are still trying to get the title. Especially because in 1970s, there were a big land reform, which was able to give the land to the peasants, many of them from belonging for indigenous communities. But the Amazon is another reality. And because it's a very hospitable regional area in terms of ways of accessing, the land titling has been very difficult and is a very expensive process. To travel to many of these places, you have to take peque or some kind of very fast boats to go for days, or even for air by helicopter. So it is not an easy process, and many communities in the way areas very far away and close to other neighboring countries such as Colombia, Brazil, Bolivia, Ecuador, their titling process has been very, very weak. And often those areas has been areas in which colonos have intruded, third parties, illegal third parties who are trying to grow coca or who are trying to do gold digging in the river, or doing other, or some people just poor peasants from the Andes that they go into this area to try to get a land to work, or even big companies who are trying to buy it to grow these more commercial crops, like the palma aceitera, Brazilian palm, have gone in many of these areas and imposed themselves over the lands that belong to the indigenous people, and they have belonged to them for centuries and centuries. So those land titling processes have been, they are very expensive. Logistically, it's difficult to get in, and you really need a political will and political program to try to get all these regularized.
But what is the political will as such? I mean, is there, I mean, because obviously your governments also must be looking at it in some way, and you had one election, and of course another government came up. How are they looking at this? What is their relationship with the indigenous people and with these resources?
Well, the titling process has gone through many different stages. One of the last one was one huge titling process, which the Inter-American Development Bank was financing. I put borrow a lot of money for the government to try to do the titling, but it just had a lot of limitations, a lot of challenges, and it was a 5-year program. It didn't go as well, as very far from going well. I was too slow, too complex, too difficult, and actually it just gave very few titling, for the amount on the huge problem and the amount of need of titling the titles or areas or lands. It didn't go as far as it could. So the program was changed once again. I think that with the new reform, this current government is trying to push for a new land reform, but this titling is still a big source of difficulties, conflicts, and challenges. So I will say that we still don't have a way of how to handle that issue.
But I mean, is there a whole lobby on the other end which does not want this titling to be done, who are benefiting from this not being done?
I think that there's some lobbying in some level, and maybe in some regions, but there are a lot of conflicts related to titling, a lot of conflicts, and because the expectation of many peasant rural communities with this government is to have the title finally, because the current government has this more social approach, which was the flags with which it was elected. There are a lot of expectations in the local communities to get finally their title. And if we would have a government that is stable, that has more permanency with their ministries and with better technical background, maybe this problem could have been handled differently. For example, this is a government that I think the latest figure shows that in a year we have had more than 60 ministries, change of ministries. And in the Ministry of Agriculture, which is the sector, the public sector, which should be working on the titling, the ministry has been changed as a matter of 4 or 5 times every 2-3 months. So it has been very difficult for the ministry to look at this problem with the technical expertise and with the political support. So because of this political instability that makes the change of ministries very frequent, that is a big limitation for developing a public policy strictly focused on land titling. So until we don't get a government which is more stable, that has clarity about public policy, that has clarity about what are the technical ways of moving, moving fast, because the mover, it can move, but it can move very slowly, but we want to move it very fast. Then we will have a big challenge into how to get this issue solved.
Luis is here. Luis came in while you were giving the presentation also, but then he went off. Hi, Luis.
Hi, Vikram. Hola, Giselle. How are you?
Hello, Lucho.
Hey. I'm getting to a meeting in the north of Lima, as you may know. So I'm full energy working meetings, traffic jams, and enjoying Lima. That's it. So I just want to say hi, and I love Giselle Huamani. She's amazing. She's the best, and I'm happy that you had the opportunity to share with Vikram, and that this is awesome.
Thank you very much, Luis, for connecting us.
Thank you, Luis.
Okay. Okay, guys. Take care. Bye.
Take care, Luis.
Bye. Bye.
Take care, Luis.
But when I hear of the work that Luis is doing, I really feel that Peru has done lots in relation to mediation with the communities. I think that you've done a lot of work.
Yes, indeed.
Because that needs to happen. But tell me one thing, interesting thing that came out. This was again last symposium that someone had come out with this, that the way people in the mountains and the plains and the coast, they handle and resolve disputes differently. Have you noticed that? Is there something that you have?
Yes, it is indeed. And it has to do very much with their experiences handling conflict, but also their expectations. It's like in the Andes, we have very interesting practices of resolving conflicts, but also new ways and new approaches are being developed. So I trust that with time we could get to harmonize and get to connect these different ways of handling conflicts in a way that it is more integrative, that is more peaceful too.
But within the communities, I mean, when you studied, I mean, I'm sure you looked at within the communities, the mediators and the processes and all. Have you put something down? I mean, looked at that? Is there something you want to share there?
Well, like all the institutions, even the church, or even some very well-known or people or leaders have the potential and have the capacity of contributing into resolving conflicts, transforming them into opportunities. What we often find is that we need to do a lot of collaboration, a lot of dialogue among even the people who are interested in resolving conflicts. so that the best is the strengths, the qualities, the contributions of different people, whether they come from the public office, whether they come from the non-governmental organization, whether they come from the church, or whether they are an elder woman or man who are capable and willing to contribute to building peace. You need to think creatively in how to incorporate them into these processes. So often we put a lot of effort in how the institutionalized mechanisms, the institutionalized figures of resolving conflict, they have the mandate, often they have some training, often they have the power also to convene and to open up space. But also the big challenge is, how do we incorporate also those people who are committed to bringing and developing peace? That means not to one or to the other actor, but to create, to sustain those spaces when nobody will think or will commit to anything else, because it's so polarized, it's so divided. But you need to give more voice, especially to those actors who can help believe in those spaces.
But what has been the role of women traditionally in dispute resolution?
Well, it is really paradoxically, because women in many of the communities, indigenous communities, they have played a very interesting role. I've seen often they call into attention, and they even discipline the actors when they don't behave well within a process of negotiation. I've seen in one case a group of women just scolding the men from the company and the men from the communities, the leaders who were negotiating bad, and they were taking too long, and they were doing who knows what when they were going to the city, and the women, they were scolding them and say to them, you are not leaving this space until you come out with a plan on how to solve this issue. So women, often I've seen them as the voice of reason, the voice of ground, voice of morality, of transparency. And I think that they could be incorporated much more in those processes, because as many women that I have known in the local communities, they are willing to play it all. They are willing to stick to the process, because the conflict affects them first and affects them dearly. So I think that they are not enoughly incorporated into the process, and some research have corroborated that. But I think that now in the legal framework for conflict resolution, the women, it is mandatory to incorporate women, or to do most effort incorporating women into the dialogue process.
That's good.
So, yeah.
But what about these NGOs, activist groups, advocacy groups? How do they play a role somewhere?
Sometimes they do. I think that when they have had an opportunity to play a constructive role, they have done so. The church, for example, is very well known for participating when everything has been exhausted, all the different mechanisms. Often some member of the church has played a role if guaranteeing space and creating trust, and sometimes even mediating when the situation is very difficult. In this case that I was mentioned to you on the Alto Nanay, an NGO called Sociedad Peruana de Derecho Ambiental, SPDA, play a very important role also mediating a conflict that was related to conservation area. So it depends. I think that we need to put more effort into how to incorporate the different institutions, the different actors that have that has that commitment, that has that ability, that has this special profile for conflict and peace building. I think each case is unique and you have to see how to involve them, but we definitely need to put a more effort into involving them, because finally, as I always say, peace is not the monopoly of one or two actors who are from the government or who are from certain sector. Peace involves the whole society. Peace involves us all.
Yeah. The only thing is you have to be careful that who is disrupting the process and who's playing a constructive role, and that balance and getting the right people in. I think that's where the challenge lies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
How do you do that? Yeah. So, Giselle, obviously it was wonderful talking to you. I mean, of course, your presentation was excellent. If you want to give any concluding remarks, anything that you want to close the session on?
No, just to thank you for the space, the opportunity, and just to say that we face new challenges now in this period, which we hope is a post-COVID period. We face new challenges in this world that is more interrelated and that is more fragile in terms of environmental dangers that we find. So we need to put more efforts and more commitment into building peace and to guarantee that there is a better world for the next generations.
Absolutely. But now the thing is that on 31st, there's a closing session where we talk about the learnings and key takeaways from the symposium. So please join that session. That's at 7 o'clock India time. And there is a symposium I told you, which is coming up on colonization, decolonization, and mediation, which starts on 15th September. And I'm sure there is lots that you will contribute on that. So I'll fix up time with you on that. And the other activity that I'm really now after this going to be concentrating on is this World Mediation Circle, which is a network of mediation circles in every community, every school, we create those circles there. So you also have to play a role in that. So thank you very much, Giselle. Wonderful having you. Wonderful having you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to definitely will be involved in other activities.